one of the articles on The Economist. Here is what it says. They call the operation of Donald Trump Operation Blind Fury. And it says that war in Iran is making Donald Trump weaker and angrier. What is happening right now is somehow amazing, that the new escalation is the attack on the Iranian oil facilities, which brought a massive reaction on the whole region. From Qatar to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and even Haifa was hit by Iranian missiles. As we know so far, Reuters reported that Qatar has lost 17% of its production capacity of LNG. And that could be a huge issue for the market. But at the same time, we have the issue of the Strait of Hormuz. And before, Michael, coming to your understanding of what is going on right now, here is what Scott Bessent said about unsanctioning, because the difficulties coming out of the Strait of Hormuz is just putting a lot of pressure on the global economy. Here is what Scott Bessent said.
A break the glass plan across the administration and at Treasury. We unsanctioned Russian oil. We knew that there were about 130 million barrels on the water, and we created supply that is beyond the Straits of Hormuz. So we anticipated this. We knew that there could be a temporary, and I want to emphasize temporary, choke point there. And there was 130 million barrels of floating storage. In the coming days, we may unsanction the Iranian oil that's on the water. It's about 140 million barrels. So depending on how you count it, that's 10 days to 2 weeks of supply that the Iranians had been pushing out. That would have all gone to China. In essence, we will be using the Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep the price down for the next 10 or 14 days as we continue this campaign.
Yeah. Michael.
Yeah, but before you even turn it to Mike, okay, everybody should appreciate what that man just said. He just said up is down, down is up, up will make up go down, and then we'll have down and it'll go up. And we'll use against the Iranians the fact that we're allowing them to sell their oil to China, which, by the way, they were doing perfectly well anyway. When you have to resort to that level of noise and incoherent make-believe, you're pretty close to the end because you got very little to lose. The credibility is gone, so you're not stretching credulity. It's already out misshapen beyond words anyway. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. It just, you really have to take a step back. Mr. Scott Bessent is the best Mr. Trump could do, and that tells you, of course, a lot about Mr. Trump.
Yeah. Michael, go ahead.
Well, the irony is that this permission to trade in Russian and Iranian oil has actually reversed the whole aim of what Trump had tried to do. In seizing Iran's oil, the effect was to achieve the opposite of three basic U.S. aims. And I had the day, since we're running later, to put what I'm saying in order. So I want to just say the three ways in which Trump's attack has just reversed the whole strategy of American foreign policy. First, by closing the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has imposed the military equivalent of sanctions on OPEC oil, forcing resort to Russian oil, Iranian oil, and ultimately in the future of oil from the very countries that the United States was trying to prevent selling. So this has reversed the U.S. sanctions against Russian supplies of oil. And Trump has said that the suspension of sanctions is only going to be for 1 month or so, as I think Bessent implied, and everything's then going to be back to normal, and he's not going to let any further purchases of Russian oil occur. Well, we now know that that's silly. We now know that the interruption of oil is going to, I think, last at least for the rest of the year and probably into 2022. 27. Now, the second thing I want to point out is the U.S. hopes for the whole last half century, since 1974, has been to become the major financial recipient of OPEC's buildup of foreign exchange wealth funds and foreign reserves. And these savings have been in the form of OPEC purchases of U.S. bonds and stocks and U.S. bank deposits. So destroying OPEC's export capacity now is obliging these countries to start selling off their dollarized reserves to finance their own debt-burdened economies and their own deficits that they're running now that they're not having any inflow of oil exports. And the third point that is something that Richard and I have been talking about for the last half year, the whole enabling myth of the U.S. demands for subsidy from foreign countries, NATO as well as OPEC, is payment for America's efforts to protect these countries against the threats from Russia, China, and Iran. Well, that whole idea of the U.S. as a protector and deserving financial support through NATO and through OPEC's purchases of arms, U.S. arms that obviously we now see don't work, is destroyed. And Trump's attack on Venezuela and Iran and his threats to attack Greenland, even Canada, have shown that instead of protecting his allies from Russia, China, and Iran, the United States itself is the greatest threat to world stability. And it's become the world's major sponsor of terrorism in its support for Ukraine against the Russian speakers, Israel against the Palestinians, and Al-Qaeda in Syria generally. So as part of this Cold War system, I think the failure of U.S. arms to protect allies has led them to realize that if they really need military protection against this ridiculous threats that Russia, China, and Iran are the main danger to them, and seek to conquer their neighbors, well, then the U.S. arms are not going to help them. Iran's missiles and drones have easily avoided the Israeli and Arab OPEC defenses, and in fact have depleted them, and that enables Iran from here on in to bomb their attackers at will. And neither the U.S. arms nor the promises to defend them work. So what is it that leads other countries not to step in right now and saying we can't afford to let the United States and Israel threaten the entire world economy and plunge our economies into financial crisis and force us to close down entire industries, lower our employment, causing unemployment, while gas prices and the price of heating homes rise and put a squeeze on consumers and force them into debt. Why are they not rising up and say, we've backed the wrong horse, it turns out. We've got to protect ourselves by intervening and stopping the U.S. attacks. And indeed, Iran has made it clear, well, these attacks are not going to stop until we settle the long-term aim. We are going to keep the United States and Israel and any U.S. allies in the Arab OPEC countries out of the Near East from now on. You have threatened us with an existential threat that we will be destroyed. Our leaders will personally be destroyed. Our oil will be seized by Donald Trump, who will appoint personally a new leader who will be sort of an Iranian Boris Yeltsin, who will let American oil companies come in and regain control of Iranian oil. That's basically the plan that other countries are acquiescing in if they don't actively step up, and they're not doing that yet. So basically, Trump has said, it's our war, but it's your problem. You remember that Texas Governor Connolly said that when the dollar devalued against gold and left only U.S. Treasury promissory notes as world reserves, he said, well, it's our dollar, it's your problem. Well, Trump saying it's our war, it's your problem, what to solve it. Do you want to provide the minesweepers to clear out the Strait of Hormuz? Do you want to supply the war to fight the troops to fight against Iran? We're not going to. All we can do is bomb. That's the only thing that we have left. We're not going to supply any troops. Trump said that again today. No troops. All we can do is bomb. And we're going to target Iran's oil field again if Iran continues to fight for its survival. Well, obviously, Iran's going to fight for its survival. And obviously, the United States intends to keep escalating until the entire Middle East's oil export capacity is ended. So all that world of relying on the U.S. as a source of stability instead of instability is now over. And the U.S.-Iran war looks like it's, as I said, it's going to go into next year. And I want to, I know that I've gone a few minutes already, but I want to discuss just one, the first point that I mentioned about the sanctions. America's long-term aim predating Trump's presidency has been to monopolize the world's oil trade by imposing sanctions against oil producers whose policies are against those of the United States, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and anyone else who wants to export oil in competition with the U.S. military and economic bloc. So by imposing trade sanctions against Iran in 1979, when it grabbed Iran's oil, when it overthrew the military police state of the Shah, and again, when it sanctioned Russian oil in 2022 and then Venezuelan oil last year, the United States had dollarized the world's oil production. And that meant this went far beyond simply pricing oil in dollars. Eve Smith always reminds me that oil trade represents only 5 to 7% of the demand for dollars. It's financial capital movements that really determine the world. And the role of petrodollars wasn't simply in pricing oil in dollars and raising the price. The whole idea of petrodollars was that the OPEC countries were going to keep all of the earnings from their oil trade and send them to the United States. And Kissinger said, we've told OPEC, you can charge whatever you want. We're not going to let you buy control of any American corporation. Not even real estate or farms. You can buy bonds or you can buy stocks. You can finance American industry, but you won't have any control to use your ownership for any of your own purposes, unlike the whole purpose of the United States when it invests. So OPEC countries account for 40% of the world's oil trade. 20% of the total oil production, but 40% of the trade. So if the Strait of Hormuz lasts more than a few months, this is going to plunge all these oil-dependent countries into a depression, and they've already announced we're having to sell off our national funds. We've had to sell off securities, presumably U.S. bonds and bank deposits, and also British holdings, in order to balance their budget, because the OPEC countries themselves have gone into debt to finance their whole real estate development in a crazy part of the world that really can't normally support real estate development. So world oil prices, along with the international stock market and the foreign exchange rates, have already announced their willingness to sort of compensate for the slowdown in OPEC exports by releasing their own national reserves of oil. Well, okay, that's going to take care of a few months, but then all of the national reserves that they've saved for just such a war emergency are going to be empty, just like their arms supplies are going to be empty. And all that's going to do is postpone the crisis to a point where, when they don't have any more oil to throw on the ground, when they won't let Russia and Iran replace OPEC as the world's major oil exporters, then there's going to be a crash. So what are other countries going to do? Are they going to say, all right, we're going to shift away from reliance on OPEC, which was a key to the U.S. financial system? Forget the trade system, the financial system, the balance of payments, all of these bond holdings and stock holdings and bank deposits. All of that is going to be begin to be reversed. And so this is what Trump has done, is reversed this basic financial aim of U.S. control of the oil trade that was supposed to be the buttress of its ability to control other countries. And so to further help prevent a serious energy crisis, as we just said, Trump has said, well, Bessent has said, you can buy Russian oil trade. A lot of this is already on ships. Well, what's going to happen after two weeks or 2 months when the ships have unloaded their oil? Bessent and Trump willing to say, all right, OPEC still isn't exporting any oil because its oil facilities have been blown up. So I guess you can continue to buy Russian and Iranian oil as far as the eye can see. Well, what a change that is from what was supposed to be the whole buttress of America's control of oil, and hence its energy trade, and hence all of the chemical industries and the fertilizer industries and everything else based on the oil trade. All of that is threatening America's closest allies, NATO, Europe, Japan, and South Korea. And yet, if you look at today, the stock markets say everything seems to be just marginally a little bit different. It's all these problems are going to be temporary. So the world is closing its eyes to the problems that Richard, me, and all of your guests have been pointing out are building up and are going to happen. It's like there's a cognitive dissonance and unwilling to look at how systemic the whole problem is that Trump's attack and Israel's attack on behalf of the United States with U.S. guidance has caused for the world.
Richard, moments ago, we've learned that Iran said that the Strait of Hormuz is open, but nobody is not. It doesn't mean that everybody can use it. China, India, Iraq, and Malaysia so far use the Strait of Hormuz. They could pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but other countries, that wasn't the case for other countries. Richard, there is an article in the Financial Times in which, the article argues that Iran's actions in the Strait of Hormuz show the reality of multipolar economic warfare. For decades, the United States dominated. It says that for decades the United States dominated sanctions and used financial pressures as a strategic weapon. Now, other powers like China and India, they're coming to the game, and their response going to be, different. And it argues that nobody knows what would be the reaction on the part of the United States. But so far, it seems that the Strait of Hormuz is making that concept much more complicated. Your understanding of what is happening right now in the Middle East?
Well, first, the larger context. I understand that people see in Mr. Trump incoherent, herky-jerky, not a very good relationship with the truth, getting the results not expected. But I don't think he's all that different from the earlier presidents. I mean, the American presidents are nothing to be shaking your head about. I know we always think the last one was better, but that's only because the one we have now is even worse than that one was. And we thought he was better than the one before. And I noticed that it's very popular now, particularly in Europe, to make fun of the quality of leadership that comes from Starmer, Macron, Maloney, Merz. It is. I admit I'm caught up in this. This is stunning incompetence and not thinking things through. It was known what the Strait of Hormuz was like for a long time. It's not a new awareness that this is a very vulnerable area and that Iran has an enormous power over it by the geography. You don't need to be a great social scientist to see it. But here's the point. When the wind is blowing in your direction, it's okay to make a mistake, or two or three, because the wind is blowing in your direction and it will correct what it is you mess up. So the United States tries to overthrow Castro in 1960-61. A catastrophic mistake. Couldn't do it, failed at it, But it didn't fundamentally change the dominance of the United States in the second half of the 20th century because the empire was rising, replacing the old Europeans, reshaping the world, doing the very petro arrangements Michael explains to us just now in earlier shows. So I want people to keep a framework for understanding. The problem now is that the wind has changed. The empire isn't growing, isn't expanding, it's shrinking. It's being outmaneuvered by a whole new economic powerhouse built above all around the People's Republic of China, but with BRICS and the alliance they have very cleverly across so many differences among the BRICS countries, nonetheless welded them into a kind of coalition, which is helping them get through this crisis. Russia can sell its oil to China. India can kind of swerve around the sanctions and buy the oil it needs from Russia, and on and on and on. Okay, so I want to keep that in your mind. Mr. Trump is now having the problem of decline. When you make a mistake, it doesn't not matter. It gets worse. It makes your situation worse than it might have otherwise been in a different circumstance. And we can already see that in 6 months. 6 months ago, Israel and America attacked Iran. Now, the consequence for the United States was relatively small. 6 months later, they attack Iran again. The consequences are horrific. What happened? What happened here? And yes, you can answer with this specific and that, but there's a larger shift going on that we need to control. All right, having said that, I want to look at some other dimensions of what is happening. The Mr. Hedges has said to us that they are asking for $200 billion in additional appropriations from the Congress to fight this war, which of course can't be a war since you didn't let Congress vote on whether or not to have a war. So Congress doesn't get to vote on whether you have one, but now has to be able to vote on whether you can fund the war they didn't participate in. These are signs this is out of control. This is such a bad piece of theater being worked out here that it screams the incompetence and the confusion, but it's much, much worse. The Supreme Court invalidated the tariffs, and there are now mountains of legal cases emerging where all kinds of people, including consumers who are hurt by the tariff, who had to pay more money, as well as countless importing corporations, they want refunds. And they're certainly going to get something. I don't know how that's going to be worked out, and I understand it will take time. But the 150, and it's not even that, but the $150 billion that was the only new revenue coming in to the United States government is now fundamentally compromised. However much of it you will still get, won't be much. Meanwhile, you have proposed a $600 billion increase in the defense budget before the war on Iran. And so now the war on Iran adds another 200 to the 600. That means, let me make sure everybody understands, the current defense budget is in the neighborhood of $900 billion. You're going to add 600 for next year's budget, plus 200 for the Iran war. You're virtually doubling your defense expenditures in 1 year, and you're the country that spends more on defense than most of the rest of the world combined. I mean, this is so completely off the wall that people are going to wonder, how are you going to do this? The only conceivable way, short of a tax increase, which he cannot do for political reasons. America never fights wars with tax money. It only fights its wars with borrowed money. Why? Because you can't get away with paying it with taxes, so you borrow it. Okay, but we are already the world's greatest debtor country. Our national debt is $35 trillion. And we no longer have AAA rating. Standard & Poor, Moody's, and Fitch, the three rating agencies, now all agree it isn't AAA, it's barely AA. So you're going to have to borrow $800 billion more, and you're already running trillion-dollar deficits. Now, when you look at this is simple arithmetic, and nothing I have said here requires any special information or secrets or nothing. This is all public information available to anyone who looks at the relevant numbers. Well, now, what's going to happen? The only way the United States can borrow the money that its whole foreign policy now requires is by borrowing like you've never seen, and that's the end of declining interest rates. You will notice that yesterday and today, the Federal Reserve, which some had said would lower interest rates because our economy is heading into a recession, didn't do it. And says it can't do it. It has to see what the consequences of this war are. And Michael just suggested they're not going to see what those consequences are for quite a while, since the war is going to continue. But the whole stock market understands the interest rates are going up. And for the American macroeconomy, this is not good. For the stock market, this is not good. And for the people who just made a lot of money in the last 2 years, betting on geopolitical turmoil by buying gold, you have to remember to buy gold is to take a risk, because gold doesn't pay you anything. There's no interest rate. There's no agency that says you get an interest. So gold is an asset which depreciates when interest rates go up, because the money is going to look for where it can get. So what has happened? The gold has crashed in the last few days, the last 2 or 3 weeks. Since this war started, not only did gold stop going up, as it had been doing for 2 years, it went down in a hurry. Oil went up, of course, but not gold. The stock market is being buffeted by these two. People are losing a lot of money because the gold they stocked up on is losing value very, very quickly. Well, this is a very dangerous moment. Gold used to be a kind of measure. You could count on it. It was an index of trouble in the world, because when there was trouble in the world, all the wealthy people would go to gold, hoping to hold on to their wealth. Once upon a time, they went to the dollar. But the very rise of gold right now, over the last 2 years, has been built around the fact that the dollar isn't a safe place to go into at all. Okay, now the dollar isn't, because it's gotten worse, not better, and gold isn't. But where the hell is the money going to go? The answer is it has no idea. That adds a whole new level of uncertainty and chaos to what? To what Michael was talking about a few moments ago, namely international capital movements. They are being attacked not only directly by everything Michael talked about, but by indirection by these macroeconomic effects of what is going on. Meanwhile, the United States is scheduled to increase its borrowing, increase dramatically its national debt. By the way, those were both things Mr. Trump promised he would correct. So it won't just be that the man who said he wouldn't have a war has already had big ones, but his deficits are going to be big, his national debt is going to be big, rising interest rates, plus the cost of energy going crazy means the inflation is going to get worse. There's already investment activity based on that assumption. This is becoming totally chaotically out of control. And I'm hoping, finally, touching to Michael's point about psychic dissonance, or you only have psychic dissonance if you allow into your brain the contradictions that are around you. America has always been a unique country in the ability to handle the existence of contradictions by pretending that they're not there. So the people who run this society, they don't face contradiction. It's all working out. And you know where that comes from? From an empire that just had a century of rising and is no way able yet to cognize the idea it's over, does not happen anymore. And we better rethink the problems because they're getting worse as we pretend that they're not there.